Hi everyone, I'm Prachi. My colleagues Sam and Suejung are here as well, but they'll be coming up on stage for questions afterwards. Today we'll be talking about a protocol to improve DSR flexibility and integration. So actually a really great kind of jumping off point from Arthur's presentation right before this. Before I go into the presentation, quick overview about myself. I'm a software engineer at Ketch, which is a startup in the privacy space. So we actually build a lot of the privacy compliance tools out there for DSRs, CMP, the whole lot. So if you're interested, come talk to us later. Happy to talk about it. But jumping right in, so today's agenda, we will first set the stage, talk about the problem, talk about why we need a protocol. Then we will dive into the implementation of our Ketch protocol and kind of setting some ground rules. This protocol is actually open source, and so I will send some links in the Slack channel afterwards as well. Third, we'll talk about some key areas of flexibility and what we really see this protocol needs to be a more mature DSR protocol. And then finally, we'll review learnings and then have some time for questions. So setting the stage, a few key terms that we'll refer to in this talk. I know a lot of people here already know about these terms, but we'll go into it regardless. First is the data subject, right? So that's consumers like me or you who have data in various entities or websites on the internet. Next, we have data controllers, which are consumer-facing businesses that actually kind of collect this data and have procedures for data usage. So that's someone like a retailer, a Chipotle, for example. And then finally, we have a data processor. So those are businesses that processes personal data on behalf of a data controller. So they often don't actually interact with the data subject directly, but they'll be talking to the data controller. So that's someone like an email marketing server like MailChimp, analytics pipelines such as Google Analytics, et cetera. And one thing here is that the modern privacy ecosystem will not necessarily have just one data subject to one controller to one processor, right? You could have a processor which has a processor, and it kind of has this network effect of controllers and processors that can make things a lot more complex. So, given all this, what is the challenge we're addressing? We just talked about DSRs, the right to access, delete, et cetera, action on the data for a data subject. But specifically, with all of these different controllers and processors in the privacy ecosystem, the communication between these entities can get complex very quickly. And that kind of brings about the need for a standardized framework for facilitating this communication. So to highlight what that actually might look like in a diagram, let's say we have a nice little data subject. There's a data controller which speaks in Diamond. So I've kind of used these shapes specifically, but we have a data controller whose APIs are, they speak in Diamond. Now let's say that controller talks to a bunch of different processors, and each of them speak a different language. Someone is talking triangle, someone else is rectangle, square, et cetera. So you can see how very quickly it gets kind of difficult from a controller perspective to actually build out comprehensive data subject rights requests and flows, because they now have to think about, okay, well, I have to figure out how to integrate with every single person that I talk to, right? But if we were to have a standardized protocol, then you can see the standardized protocol layer that everyone kind of knows how to talk. And so in this analogy, everyone knows how to talk in Diamond. And so it's a lot less lift from both the controller and the processor side in order to kind of go through the entire data subject rights fulfillment cycle. So given that, let's actually dive into this protocol. Again, this is open source. I'll link the docs afterwards. But the handshake actually obviously starts with, and let's see, I think people can see it. Great. So the handshake always starts with the data subject themselves sending the request. So for the purposes of this example, we'll actually talk about access requests. So once the data subject sends a request, we kind of have exchange of information here between a data controller and a data processor, right? So the data controller will take that request, send it over to the data processor. If the data processor does processing in an online format, so it's synchronous, they might actually send the completed results back in the access response directly. If they do it in an offline way, then maybe they'll send back they'll just validate some key things, send back a 204 HTTP status for pending back in the access response, and then process their request and send over a status event saying, hey, it's complete, once the processing is complete. After that's done, the controller notifies the data subject that, hey, your data is now ready for accessing. The data subject will log into whatever portal or on the controller side and download the data, upon which the data controller will actually talk to the results server on the data processor side to get information for that access request. And finally, that results data is returned back to the data subject. So there's kind of a lot of things going on here, but what I want to focus on is specifically that initial exchange, so right here, between the data controller and the data processor, and what that API exchange might look like. Oh, okay. So the API request interface, there's a lot of JSON that I've written here, that I've kind of linked here, but the key components here are, we really want to make sure that we are only exchanging information that is really necessary. We don't want to have a situation where our APIs have additional fields just for, in the case of, we might need it in the future, right? So the key components here are, one, the information about the data subject, so who has invoked the request, what are their identities. Two, the data controller information, so what is the controller, which jurisdiction are they in, what is the regulation, et cetera. And then third, additional metadata about the data subject rights requests, and that actually helps with a lot of the flexibility that I'll be talking about in the future. But again, so we really want to make sure that we are really only transmitting information in this exchange that is strictly needed for fulfilling a data subject rights request. So to that end, the response, very similar, 3 key components, the result from the requested DSR action, so if it's pending, complete, et cetera, data subject information that's likely replayed from the request, and then any additional metadata about the DSR request as well. So going into, so the API request and response fields, that's great, but we really want to talk a little bit more about some key areas of flexibility there that are inbuilt in this API protocol, right? So on the data subject, there's actually key value pairs called form data, and that's what the naming that we've used in our standard protocol that can define any additional identifiers about a data subject. So for example, a customer's account ID, right? So a customer might want to propagate their account ID to a data controller in the case of when a data controller is someone like Dish or Sling, right? What's interesting here is that data subject rights fulfillment intake forms, so if you go to a website and actually fill out the data subject rights intake, they can be very different across different controllers based on the business needs and the use cases of the controllers, right? So you need to have some sort of flexibility built in to handle these different types of DSR forms. Next, the next area of flexibility in our protocol is something that we like to call context variables. In both the API request and the response schema that I showed a bit earlier, you would see these context variables. See, these are kind of more metadata almost about a data subject rights request. The way that I like to think about it are these variables are often values that the data subject themselves does not know, but they're important to preserve state and context throughout the fulfillment. So for example, maybe a customer's email subscription ID. So the customer themselves doesn't know it when they're filling out the data subject rights form, but it is very important in the exchange from a controller to a processor to send that subscription ID over in order to get all of the information about a user, right? So that's kind of another area of flexibility there that we can kind of really compact down and make sure that we don't bloat our API models, but still kind of have this flexibility in place. Great. So given this kind of API protocol and all of the things that we have to think about with data subject rights requests, what did we learn? So the first thing, and that's the thing that we really want to people to take away from, is that a standardized communication protocol, we are not there yet, but it is super important to kind of reliably scale data subject rights fulfillment across your entire controller processor network. Because otherwise you're going to get into a situation where everyone is building one-off privacy APIs, and it gets a lot harder for you to scale in such a ecosystem. Next, even though the privacy landscape is complex, your data subject protocol can be quite simple. In fact, I think it should actually be pretty simple. Otherwise, it's, again, the scalability problem comes in, right? And finally, in order to handle a complex privacy landscape but have your DSR protocol be simple, really think about building in these flexibility levers, so seeing what the use cases are, trying to figure out what patterns are, and kind of building these flexibility levers in there. Great, I think that is all for my talk. I'm going to have Sam and Suejung come up, but we would love to answer any questions.